let's see what the more budget-oriented chassis model from Antec's Performance series has to offer. Hi guys, Matthew here and welcome back again to my channel. This right next to me is Antec's P7 chassis, a model that aims to be of a balanced value. But before I go into details, let me first show you how I built a system in it. So here we are, everything is set and done, but where to start from? Well, few things stand out right away. The most obvious one is this contrast in black colors between the front plastic panel and the chassis frame. It's a bit off-putting, it feels like you put an aftermarket replacement piece. Another one is the fact that the left side window is acrylic, which yeah, it kinda feels dated, I know, but maybe we got a bit used to seeing tempered glass side panels, as either way you put it, it's hard to make a $50 chassis that has it all, plus a tempered glass side panel. They did do a good job of implementing the acrylic window into the side panel. It's flush with it and has a big surface. While it's a bit too tinted for my taste, it's really hard to see anything through. Reminds me sort of that first wave of tempered glass side panels. Maybe that's the effect they wanted to achieve. Speaking of the tempered glass, be sure to subscribe if you haven't, because for my next chassis I'm going to take a look at Fractal's Vector RS series together with their Celsius all-in-one water cooler solution. I haven't checked them in a while, so I'm really excited to see them in action. Back to the P7, that aforementioned $50 price tag is reflecting everything else here. It revolves around it, you cannot avoid that fact. Like for example the build quality, you can feel that the chassis kinda seems skinny and light, but despite that everything else is well put together and the final finish is really good, which is why it's giving that slightly better perceived build quality. On the other hand, the dust filter on the bottom is just a cut-up. Like this, it's a bit messy to pull it out and put it back in. Or for example, look how these stand-up legs have just a blip of rubber padding, although the feet itself have a much larger surface. You also have those, if you pull them off once, you cannot put them back, or to be more precise, non-reusable expansion slot covers. Only the first one is, which is a bit weird since it has this clamp plate above them, so basically the whole deal except the reusable expansion slots. Bottom line, it all comes down to you win some, you lose some, but again, as I said, it's not like this is a bad thing in itself, it's to be expected for this price point. I really cannot resent them. Putting that aside, I really like how the chassis looks. It's really simple, cuts clean, nothing is over the top, just like we're used to seeing from Antec. You'll only get these two thin red stripes on each side of the front panel and one on the bottom, and that's it. The plastic front panel itself has that brushed aluminum finish imitation, so it gives it a little bit of that premium flair. On the top of it you can see that it has your pretty usual array of I/O ports, separate audio in and out jacks, two USB 3.0 ports, power on switch, which has this LED ring around it, which is powered using HDD LED indicator using the front panel header on the motherboard, but it doesn't seem to be indicating its activity, and a pretty big reset switch. Thankfully, Antec went with the best possible solution of separating these ports and switches from the front panel itself, so once you pull it off, which is done with minimal force, they just stay put, so there are no cables pulling back the front panel and preventing you to remove it completely. Taking a look at the inside of the chassis, everything is very simply laid out. There is not much going on in the main compartment. We have few cutouts above the motherboard tray, one right-angled raised up duct-like pass-through on the right edge of the motherboard, and one slightly bigger cutout at the bottom in the middle of it all. As you can see, they don't have any rubber grommets, but their edges feel thick and they are rounded enough so you don't cut yourself for cables. The chassis can take up to 165mm tall CPU air coolers, and here we have Noctua's 158mm tall NHU12S Chromax model, fitting without a problem, even with the fan being brought up a bit higher like this. On the right of it we have enough empty room to put a long graphics card, a bit below 440mm in length, unless you plan to put a radiator, which then of course limits the length of the GPU to around 390mm. The radiator and fan configuration is pretty flexible, since there's a cutout in the front top part of the power supply shroud, so you can even go for a push-pull configuration. Speaking of the power supply shroud, it goes from front to back and completely covers that space, without any logos or cutouts around the power supply area, so everything looks pretty clean down there. Moving to the back, we have two metal 2.5-inch drive caddies on the left half, which are easily removable just by undoing some screws, and the only thing I didn't like about them is the fact that they are just a few centimeters away from the SATA ports on the motherboard, which means you'll either have to get shorter SATA cables, or you will have some trouble doing the cable management, as everything will be crammed within that small space span. Although there's plenty of cable tie points, for which you'll actually get few Velcro ties in the bundle, there's not that much room in between the motherboard tray and the right side panel, so you will be better off separating the cables from each other rather than stacking them around a certain area. Thankfully, I also had Antec's fully modular high current gamer 80 plus gold 650 watt power supply, so I didn't have any problems with the unnecessary amount of cables, as I could pick and choose what I'm going to use. The power supply tucks in nicely in the bottom back part of the shroud, where the chassis has its own soft thick mounting pads, so the power supply is decently raised up from the bottom intake mesh, but it still probably won't pull a lot of dust in because of the filter that I mentioned earlier, plus this model has a semi-passive hybrid mode, so the fan doesn't spin all the time. There's enough room for the cables between it and the 3.5-inch toolless drive cage when it's pushed all the way to the back, which is its default position. You can move it all the way to the front if you wish to for more space just by undoing 4 thumb screws, but be aware that you are then eating into your radiator space if you plan to put something here, or you can just remove it completely if you don't plan to use any 3.5-inch or additional 2.5-inch drives. As for the cooling situation, you will only get one pre-installed 120mm exhaust fan on the back, again reasonable considering the price point, while on the front you can put up to 360mm radiator. Unfortunately, as you probably noticed, there's no ventilation holes or cutouts on the top panel, which is a shame. I'm not sure if that would bring up the cost of production if it was otherwise. Probably would, considering that it's a more complex route to go for, so my guess is that's the reason why they opt out. A bigger problem lies in the fact that we have a pretty restricted airflow, since the front panel only has these small side ventilation cutouts, which also have fixed dust filters. There's an obvious difference in GPU and CPU temperature with the panel being pulled off, even with no fans being installed on the front. As for the noise, since it doesn't have a lot of its own fans, and the one that is in is quiet to begin with, the noise floor will differ depending on what you put in the chassis hardware-wise. Here's a short sound clip of the chassis during idle and load, while also showing you the sound meter for a measurement comparison. When you sum it up, this model is somewhere in the middle with all of its pros and cons laid out. Its competition is pretty harsh in this segment, although they are all pretty much similarly priced, so it all comes down to personal preferences, especially for those who don't care about chassis airflow that much. They will probably go about its design and looks, which is where Antec's P7 stands a decent chance among others. That's it for this time from me. Thank you once again for watching. Please take a second to toss me a thumbs up if you enjoyed my content, that really helps a lot. And if you like what you saw, feel free to subscribe, and if you already are, be sure to press that notification bell down below so you don't miss out on a new video. And until then, catch you later guys.